Gun policy takes a back seat during Trump's first week back in office, plus a familiar face returns to lead the ATF. All this and more on the news update.
No, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the news update. I'm contributing writer Jake Fogleman, joined as always by Reload founder Stephen Gutowski. TheReload.com, of course, is where you can head on over today to sign up for our free weekly newsletter to keep you up to date on all things going on in the world of gun politics and policy. And this week's episode is also brought to you in part by The Dispatch, but more on that at the end of the show. To kick us off this week, obviously the big news is that a new administration has officially been sworn in. The Trump administration was inaugurated at the beginning of the week, and all eyes were sort of watching what he would do because he made these big grandiose promises about his immediate action that he would take when he took office. And he certainly took a lot of immediate action. There was a flurry of executive orders and pardons and commutations. But gun politics were not really present during that.
Yeah, really kind of completely absent from his early day actions. He didn't issue a single executive order that primarily focused on gun policy or even had really a significant ancillary focus other than, I guess, the pardons, which we'll talk about. But and then they even put out a literal priority list on the White House website, which does not mention at all the Second Amendment or firearms or guns. So, it doesn't necessarily mean that he won't deliver on some of the promises he made during the campaign. It's, again, very early days here. Usually you judge a president after their first 100 days on what exactly their top priorities are, because that's when they're going to be trying to make the biggest moves in their administration, the first half of it, right, before you get to the midterms and all that. But so, he's got plenty of time to do some of the things he said to do. Now, and to be fair, also, he didn't really promise a lot during the campaign. This kind of gets missed out on because I think Trump's rhetoric is very generically pro-gun, if that makes sense. Like, he talks about being very pro-gun and the defender of the Second Amendment, and that's how he discusses, and he talks about how he believes in the importance of the Second Amendment. But this campaign, he did not make a lot of specific promises outside of essentially rolling back some of the things that Joe Biden did while in office. And he hasn't started to do that yet, but again, plenty of time to do it. However, what I think the key takeaway from watching this first week is, especially the first day, right? It was obviously a bit of a spectacle. They intentionally loaded up a ton of executive orders, 33 in total on the very first day. A lot of presidents don't do more than 40, 45 in 100 days. So, it was an intentionally show of authority and force there, he's going to be aggressive in trying to pursue all the things that he really cares about. And guns did not make it into that first day priority list, and nor into the literal priority list that they had posted on the White House website. So, that says something about, again, where gun policy falls in this administration's to-do list. And I think it's pretty far down that list. We saw this, right, with some of the nominations he made for cabinet positions. Most obviously the Attorney General pick of Pam Bondi, given her history of supporting red flag laws and age restrictions for gun owners in Florida, and the fact that she went through a confirmation hearing without really being pressed at all on those positions by Republican senators. Again, I think speaks not necessarily to the idea that Donald Trump's administration is going to push new gun control laws, though they certainly could. We've seen that happen before with the bump stock ban and And Pam Bondi made those comments at the White House with Donald Trump after Parkland. So, it certainly could happen, but it does. None of this necessitates that that's what he's going to do at all. It's just to say that when there are other priorities higher than gun rights, like immigration or reforming the administrative state to Trump's will, that those are going to take precedence over gun rights. And that's why Pam Bondi is going to, swim through to confirmation without any Republican opposition or even attempt to get her to change her positions, even, just for show or in public, because there's other things that Trump is much more concerned about than this. So that's what the message that I would take away from these early days is not necessarily that the Trump administration is going to double back and start pursuing new gun restrictions, but just that they are not, or that they won't eventually follow through on some of the things he promised. Because I think that I would be surprised if he doesn't try to undo for instance, a lot of the ATF rules that the Biden administration put in place with pistol brace ban, the ghost gun ban, the used gun sales rule that they put in place to try and force people to get FFLs if they want to sell used firearms. Those sort of things, I think I would be surprised if they didn't eventually try to roll those back like he promised. It's just that he did. I think we covered this during the campaign. He didn't actually promise a whole lot on gun policy. In fact, just like this priority list, right? We covered at the time, they took the gun policy promises, the gun rights promises out of their platform this time around. And so, it shouldn't really be very surprising that it didn't show up in the official priority list on the White House website either.
Yeah, that was sort of the point I was going to make, is that, like you said, it doesn't say anything about gun policy never showing up in this administration, but it is right. Sort of more evidence of this theme that we've been covering for a long time, that the Trump campaign sort of tipped its cap about where guns stand in terms of its desires, or at least immediate desires. The theme of this, first blitz of executive orders, I think to a lot of people was, Trump is making good on a lot of his campaign promises to a lot of core followers or who he perceives to be his core allies. He immediately touches on things like DEI, immigration, all these things that he said repeatedly in the campaign trail, but guns were not one of them. And then, like you said, the fact that on the actual priorities list, it doesn't show up at all. It's just a sign that, like you said, it doesn't rise to the same level in the minds of the folks at the top of the administration as some of these other issues do, apparently.
Right. Yeah. And, it's just another example of look, gun rights advocates may still prefer a Trump administration to a Biden administration, even if he doesn't take strong action in the ways that they want, because the Biden administration was actively using a whole of government approach to trying to restrict firearms. And certainly it's pretty clear that a Harris administration would have followed a similar path as well. So, it's not to say that there isn't a clear difference between even a very toned down approach to guns for Donald Trump on the policy front and what the previous administration had done. But it's also another example of where Donald Trump's rhetoric doesn't always match, his actions on guns. Because rhetorically, he's probably one of the most pro-gun politicians out there, but that doesn't always show up in his actual policies that he tries to implement, and his rhetoric can change after major mass shootings. And so, anyway, that's I think that the big takeaway from this first week is just the lack of action. There's not a lot of news coming out of the administration. The closest thing we got, honestly, was. Actually, one thing we should cover first is there was one thing he did that had some gun policy implications, and it was probably the most unpopular thing that he did, which was he pardoned all of the January 6th rioters And then he commuted the sentences of 14 of the worst offenders, I guess, the people who were convicted of conspiracy to attack the Capitol building and the congressional proceedings that day. And but he pardoned the vast majority of those who'd been convicted in the wake of the January 6th Capitol riot. And that included a bunch of people who were convicted of felonies for violent offenses, either against police officers or others. And so those people now have their gun rights back. The people who assaulted police and were convicted of it during January 6th can now, because of the pardons, buy guns again. In fact, and so can basically everyone else who was convicted of. Now, not everyone who was convicted of a felony level offense, and they weren't all prohibited persons to begin with. Just to be clear on this, it's not all 1,500 would be affected as far as their gun rights go, but a lot were, including maybe one of the most famous rioters that day, the QAnon shamans, who took to Twitter to celebrate the pardon by saying he was going to go and buy a gun. So, I guess that was maybe the most substantial gun action that Trump took. I don't think that was necessarily the intention of the pardons, but it is an effect of them. Similar to, Joe Biden did a bunch of pardons. Hunter Biden now can buy guns again, despite being convicted of a federal gun crime because of the pardon. Now, Biden was a little more lopsided as far as, Trump so far has done a bunch of pardons and some commutations. People who have their sentence commuted, if they were convicted of a felony, they will still be barred from owning guns. So like the leader of the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers guy with the eye patch, that they don't have their gun rights restored. They've been released from prison extremely early from their lengthy sentences, but they haven't had their gun rights restored. So, but all the other people who were pardoned, they have. And so Biden took kind of the opposite approach with some of his controversial commutation or acts of clemency at the end of his administration. And he focused more on commuting sentences for people on death row. I think he commuted most of the people on death row, but they would still remain in prison and wouldn't have their gun rights restored. Obviously, he only pardoned about 39 people in addition to some of the preemptive pardon stuff that he's done. We don't need to get into all of that here. It's not really our focus, right? But just the gun side of it, somebody like Hunter will be able to own guns again despite the gun conviction. But most of the 39 that Biden pardoned were nonviolent drug offenders, I guess, is reading through the descriptions of the pardons. So they'll have their gun rights restored, but they also, it appears that most of them did not commit violent crimes, unlike a lot of these January 6th defendants. I think that one's going to be one that follows around for a while, because we actually one of the links, I guess, to get ahead of ourselves a little bit here, deals with one of these rioters, right?
Yeah, another nexus to guns from this is that one of them, shortly after being pardoned, was just charged with federal gun crimes. Almost, I think, the day after, or maybe 2 days after the pardon came down.
Right.
There's already one again facing federal felony charges for firearms. So
yeah, I mean, the kind of people who showed up at the Capitol and beat their way through the police lines to get in are not necessarily stable people with great backgrounds. So that's another thing. Like this. Doesn't pardon them of all crimes, just these crimes.
Right.
And so there may still be several like this guy that you're talking about here who are still prohibited because of other offenses that they've committed either previously or since January. I mean, a lot of these people were out of prison already because their sentences weren't. This was 4 years ago. Their sentences weren't, not all of them had very long sentences. But so, I think hundreds is a number where they still were in prison. So, or did serve very long sentences. So, yeah, my guess is that's going to follow him around probably his whole presidency, because these people are probably going to pop up in not great circumstances from here on out. And that tends to follow politicians around when you pardon somebody and then they recommit crimes later on.
Yeah.
That's a pretty common negative story you'll see for politicians. And
right.
Trump just did that for 1,500 people. So we'll see.
It does go back to that kind of theme we're talking about in the first part of the segment too, though, is that this was a campaign promise that he made. And as controversial as it is, he stuck to it on that first day, whereas other
this was a top priority for him. I mean, it was for one thing that he did. Again, like you said, it goes back to this idea that gun policy.
Right. He's willing to take the heat and follow through on this, but he's not willing to maybe do that for other constituency groups.
At least not right away. Right.
Right. There is some question of the Office of Gun Violence. I mentioned this in my write-up, sort of his actions. There's still an open question, I think, about perhaps one thing, and that is the Office of Gun Violence Prevention that listeners may recall Joe Biden famously started. It was a long time priority of sort of the institutional gun control movement. They were pushing him from day one to do this, and he put it off for a couple of years, and he finally did it. And its stated goal is essentially to be like the air traffic controller of the White House's gun control efforts and to coordinate with states and to funnel money to state gun programs.
It's kind of a clearinghouse for gun control advocates inside of the White House, basically. Essentially.
And it was run by a former Everytown guy. And so, that kind of tells you what we're dealing with here. And as you might imagine, gun rights advocates hated it and wanted it to go away. And shortly after Trump was elected, the NSSF put out a big press blitz calling for Trump to do away with it on day one.
Right.
Now, fast forward to he's in office, and that the webpage for that office is down. And we don't have a statement from the White House. We don't know. We haven't seen a
we did
directive.
Ask too.
Yeah, we did ask. Yeah, but no one is saying anything. But that is down, at least on the White House's website.
Yeah, you're seeing a lot of people assume that means that the office is closed, and there were some former staffers, Biden staffers, who made the same assumption. Right. But the only problem with that is, if you look around the White House website, for instance, when I was looking up the pardons, the Biden's pardons, looking up some details on those. I tried to look at the press release for those pardons, and that page is also down. It seems like there's just a lot of pages that are down in the process of migrating from the Biden White House to the Trump, like the literal website migration. So it's not entirely clear to me that it means the office is gone, especially because you've seen in some of these executive orders where he will officially change, announce offices change. Like, for instance, Doge, the whole Elon Musk thing about that's supposed to be dedicated to cutting government spending. They made that an official White House office by just changing an office that already existed, digital strategies office or something. So they did that and announced it, and it was part of an actual order that they put out. Where there's nothing like that with this White House Gun Violence Prevention Office. So it's just very hard to tell whether the website is down because the office is gone, or if it's just down because a lot of old Biden era White House web pages are not working anymore under the new Trump White House website. So that's where the confusion is. I would also, the other thing about it, and look, I think it's very likely that if he has not already shut it down, that he probably will, or will rename it to restaff it to be something very different from what Biden was using it for. I don't doubt that that's going to happen, or maybe has happened. We don't know because they won't say. But it feels like grasping at straws if that's your big accomplishment from the gun rights groups. Like, you get a lot of people bragging about this when that office, it's not much. It's not much of anything. They didn't really do anything, to be frank. Like, there was, in fact, I was reading a New York Times article from a couple of years ago for another story we'll talk about related to the ATF. But in there was a whole fight in the Biden administration with the gun control groups about forming this office, because the Biden administration's senior staff people argued that it was more effective to run policy operations through the current setup that they had through the chief of staff's office, because that would be better at actually getting policy implemented than having a whole new separate office. And the gun control people countered that with the idea that the office was not there to get policy enacted. It was more of a symbolic thing to show that the Biden administration was taking gun violence seriously and making it a priority. And so like this office shutting down, honestly, it doesn't really matter much. It's something, I guess, but shutting down a symbolic office that existed for like 2 years under one president, I don't know, man. Like, if that's your big get, it's pretty pathetic.
Yeah, it's definitely small potatoes compared to other goals and asks by the gun rights movement. I think that's fair to say.
If that's, look, it's early days, and anything I'm sure is people want to see some difference between, especially gun rights advocates were very unhappy with the Biden administration, obviously. And so anything different is going to be something that people celebrate. But it's just like, I mean, you're holding them to a super low bar if that's what you're getting excited about, I guess.
Yeah.
It's just the point I want to trying to make there. So it's not even clear.
Right.
A lot of celebration over something we don't even know has actually happened. They won't even say it. It's a bit like, if they have done this thing, they're not taking credit for it at all. And so maybe they should, or maybe they haven't done it. I don't know. Or they just think it's such a low priority that it's not even worth telling people they did it. Bit strange. I mean, but again, early days of administration, maybe it's a bit chaotic in there, and not everything is perfectly timed on every issue. I don't know. I don't want to come off as though any of this means really significant stuff about gun policy for the next 4 years, because I don't think it does. It's just a clear indication of where the priorities are and where they aren't. That's my big takeaway.
Yeah, I think that's right. But stepping away from the federal level, one thing that gun rights advocates can celebrate is something that I'm going to have in the members newsletter for Reload members this week. But the fact that in California, a gun rights suit that sued the state of California over its policy of not giving out-of-state Americans any avenue to lawfully carry. There was just a new development in that lawsuit where a judge issued a form of an injunction against it and forced California to offer an avenue for non-residents who are members of the gun rights groups that sued in this case to have an avenue to apply and obtain non-resident carry permits. So that's obviously a big deal, because this was a bit of a test case after the Bruin decision of what that means for non-resident carry rights in the few states that don't have any reciprocity or offer non-resident permits. So a little bit of progress on that front. Yeah.
So now once this process is put in place, and I think you'll have a members piece that explains some of the details here this weekend, but I mean, it'll be the first time that people outside of California who aren't law enforcement officials can carry legally in the state. So that's a pretty big deal. It's similar to what we saw actually before Bruin in DC with the Wren case, where DC kind of front ran what all these other deep blue areas are going through now when it comes to concealed carry laws, because they had a total ban not that long ago, maybe a decade at this point. Feels like less time for me, but I guess I'm just getting old. But they used to have a total ban on gun carry that was struck down, and then in response, they and they had a total ban on gun carry and a ban. They didn't allow any non-resident permits. That you could get a permit anyway, but then they moved to a system of may issue carry laws, like the ones that were at issue in Bruin, and that was struck down as unconstitutional. And in that case, the judge also forced the city to start accepting non-residents applications for permits, and that they had to issue permits to non-residents. And so they did. And that's how I have a DC concealed carry permit myself, because I live in Virginia. They do not, DC still does not have any reciprocity agreements with any other state. This was kind of the issue we were talking about with Rep. Hudson. That's what one of his marquee bills is trying to address, is there's a lot of states that either have extremely limited reciprocity deals with other states for concealed carry or don't allow it at all. Some states like Virginia allow residents with a permit from any other state to carry within Virginia. But then you have right across the river, across the Potomac in DC, where they don't allow anyone without a DC permit to carry. But they do, because of this court ruling, allow you to get non-resident permits. And so now that seems to be where California is going to end up now. It'll be interesting to see how that permit process goes for non-residents, because that's been one of the big hangups in California and a lot of these deep blue states where Bruin, forced them to get rid of their May issue laws. They instead went to laws that oftentimes make it very difficult to actually obtain the permit, either by making the cost exorbitant, $1,000+ in some of these California jurisdictions, or requiring an abnormal amount of training time, which is also basically just requiring additional cost for people. So it'll be interesting to see how California handles the non-resident requirements. My guess is that they'll make it as difficult as possible, because that's the MO of the state, right? To try and push everything right up to the line. That's a common thing we've seen. Not that that's limited to any particular activist or issue, but that has definitely been the response from gun control activists. Whenever a law is struck down by the courts, they try to come up with a law that's edges right up to the legality in that ruling. So I wouldn't be surprised if they require you to go in state, but we'll have to see exactly what I'll have to read I haven't read the full ruling yet. So I'll be interested in your analysis of it and your explanation once we have that out for readers.
Yeah, members should check that out for sure. But like you said, that's an important caveat, because not only the arduous process of obtaining the permit, but then the big sensitive places bill that they pass. So once you have it, how valuable is it actually if you can't carry anywhere when you're visiting the state? So
exactly,
that's all stuff that's going to be up in the air as this goes forward. But getting into some ATF news that we have this week, you reported a story about a familiar face being back atop the agency, at least for the time being. Marvin Richardson's back.
I guess this goes to to what we were discussing at the top of the show, just like the lack of gun action, like the ATF now, and look, you could credit Donald Trump with this to a certain degree, right? Because one of his promises was to fire the previous director, that Stephen Dettelbach, who Joe Biden had managed to get through the confirmation process and become the permanent director of the ATF. He resigned on January 18th before Trump took office. So one of the things Trump promised, he couldn't deliver on because it had already been done. To be fair, right, to Donald Trump on that front, like maybe one of the things he was going to do was fire Dettelbach if Dettelbach hadn't just resigned. But and this is another area where, beyond that, we have no idea what Trump wants to do with the agency. We know that a lot of gun rights activists, and we've talked about this on the show, and we've had, for instance, Robert Leiter, who's a professor at George Mason University, and who studies, administrative law in the ATF and the Second Amendment. And he talked about he argued at least that the most effective way forward for gun rights advocates is to put somebody who's an administrative expert, somebody who knows how the ATF works, put them in there and reform the group. Others have pushed for somebody like Brandon Herrera, who's a popular gun tuber. He ran for Congress. We talked about his run for Congress when he was doing that. Kind of a splashy move that a lot of gun rights activists online like that idea. Putting him in there to kind of take a wrecking ball to the agency, I guess, is the concept. Some people want to dissolve the ATF altogether, right? There's even, I think, a bill in Congress. I don't think it's not one we talk about because I don't think it has any chance at all of going anywhere. But these are things that people have advocated for in the gun rights space, we have seen no indication yet from Donald Trump or the Trump administration on what he plans to do there. We have also heard from reporting at the New York Times that Pam Bondi is advocating for a more traditional career law enforcement person to be the ATF director. And that is somebody like Marvin Richardson. Marvin Richardson, for those who don't recall, he was the acting director of the ATF for a period at the very beginning of the Biden administration. We broke the story at the time that after Biden nominated Shipman, who was a former ATF agent turned gun control activist, and his nomination failed in large part because of the reporting that we did at the time, to be frank. We also broke the news that when Biden decided to nominate somebody else, Stephen Dettelbach, a former Ohio Attorney General candidate on the Democratic ticket, who took a number of gun control positions during that race, but also a former U.S. attorney. When Biden decided to nominate him, he took Richardson, who had been running the ATF since through this period, and not only did not give him the opportunity to be director, but demoted him to move him out of the way for Dettelbach to come in. And that created a bit of controversy at the time, especially among Marvin Richardson is African American, he's a black guy, and this way he was treated during this period as somebody who was a 30-year career ATF agent, upset a lot of black law enforcement members. There was a black law enforcement group that spoke out about what happened with Richardson. Also, black gun rights activists. The National African American Gun Association spoke out against Biden's treatment of Richardson during that period. We had actually had the president of that organization on the podcast. If people want to go back and listen to that episode to get an idea of what was going on with that, especially since Chipman, one of the reasons that he failed to get through to be permanent director were accusations of racist comments that he had made. That was one of the key issues in his confirmation process that led to him not getting hold. And then, Richardson is sitting there as the head of the ATF, and Biden passes him over again for another white guy. Basically, it was sort of one of the main complaints. But Richardson stuck around, I guess, and he's now not acting director. He is the deputy director, but he is the highest ranking ATF official once more at this point. And he's an interesting figure for sure. He's you saw him kind of take criticism from both ends at different points, because during the run up to the Dettelbach pick, the gun control activists complained about Richardson claiming he was too close to the industry, because these are frankly pretty weak complaints, because he appeared at the ATF, he appeared on behalf of the ATF at SHOT Show, which is the industry trade show, and talked to industry members, which is like a thing that pretty much everyone does. Every director has done, including Dettelbach did that.
Yeah.
So, a bit of a weird complaint from those guys. And also they were claiming that he was slow walking the ghost gun rule, because he had announced at SHOT Show that it was going to take a couple more months before it would be finalized. But honestly, the ghost gun rule went pretty standard time frame for the rulemaking process, and delaying it did. The complaints didn't really make any sense, because the industry not really even necessarily it's not a major priority, the ghost gun stuff, to them, because that's not what the industry does, right? The industry, the vast majority of the gun industry is licensed and regulated and sells serialized firearms. So it's a bit of a pretty big stretch, some of the complaints that they had made from the left against him. And then you've seen writers like John Crump at AMLN has claimed that Richardson was one of the people backing the pistol brace ban and advocating for it, one of the internal advocates. So that he's gotten complaints from gun rights activists on that front. I don't have independent confirmation that that's the case. I certainly have never seen Richardson. He's not somebody who's like spoken out against any of these ATF restrictions or rules. So I don't know that he has any particular opposition to doing them. So he seems, for the most part, like a pretty standard career law enforcement official. So he actually is kind of well positioned to maybe become the acting director. It depends on whether or not Donald Trump wants to get into the political fight of picking an actual permanent director that has to go through the confirmation process, because that will take it'll probably take some, maybe even a significant amount of political capital to do that. And he tried to do it the first time and failed. His first pick, Canterbury, did not make it through the confirmation process. He was blocked by Republicans, actually, which is a risk for any ATF pick that you get this time around, too, because the margins are not. He's 53 votes. It's, those are still fairly slim margins to get confirmation of a very controversial position like ATF director. It's only happened twice since 2006 when they first started needing Senate confirmation. So, and Trump I've written about this in the past, right? Will he even try to do it? Trump has been happy to go with acting directors in the past in his first administration. So Richardson might be there to stay. We don't know. And I guess we should touch on this just briefly. I've reached out to the ATF multiple times, both by calling the spokesperson, emailing her, emailing the press line, calling the regular press line, and got no response from anyone along the way. And so I think you had a similar situation too with the story that you recently did, right?
Yeah, I was trying to get some more clarification on, because there's some rumors that the ATF zero tolerance policy may or may not be rescinded or reversed. And I've seen that talked about, but once again, no confirmation. I reached out, didn't hear anything back from the agency. Obviously we didn't hear back from the White House on the gun violence prevention office either. So there seems to be a lot of tight lips.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on right now. We're not getting any answers from anyone, even on sort of basic stuff like who's running the ATF. I mean, the main reason we know it's Marvin Richardson is their website. Their website lists Marvin Richardson as deputy director at the top of the leadership, pyramid. So we haven't had any comments, or we haven't had any questions answered, and I don't know what's going on with that. There seems to be some of this going on around the administration right now. I think they shut down all communications from the various federal health departments. So I don't know if this is related or not, or what's going on there. Hopefully we'll get some answers on that in the future. Obviously, Trump himself has been out there taking questions and answering things, but some of these other areas, not so much. And we'll keep on top of that, but it's just something to note. We don't really know exactly what's going on in the ATF right now. But we had just one or two more quick stories, right?
I would say in the newsletter link, speaking of the ATF, once again, the Wall Street Journal I think they scooped this one. They caught wind that the Trump administration has officially given the ATF and some other federal law enforcement agencies, I believe the Marshal Service as well, and perhaps DEA, I think, basically given them some authority to enforce immigration on top of their existing federal purview. Right.
And so I guess there is one thing we know, or at least that the Wall Street Journal has reported based off internal memos, which is essentially that Trump has actually given the ATF or ATF agents more power, more authority to. Now it's for a different area of law, obviously. And this actually, I did see some criticism of this from the gun control groups. I think it was Giffords complained that this was sort of diverting the ATF resources towards immigration enforcement. They had said that would weaken firearms law enforcement. I mean, it's not really clear that they're diverting ATF agents. They're just sort of giving them more power. We don't know yet if that's going to translate into using ATF agents for ICE raids or something. I'd be surprised if that's where it ends up. But yeah, I mean, right now, as far as we've seen, the action on the ATF, the only thing he's done is empower ATF agents to enforce other laws too. So giving them more authority. But hey, that is an interesting report.
Absolutely. And then the last thing we want to touch on is just sort of another update on the ongoing waiting game that everyone's playing to see what the Supreme Court's going to do in the big, the Snope case and the Ocean Tactical case, dealing with one, Maryland's so-called assault weapon ban, and then Rhode Island's ban on so-called large capacity magazines. It was relisted once again. So this week, on Tuesday, they had another orders list day. Nothing on those cases, and then they were rescheduled for the conference that's being held as we're speaking, actually, this Friday. And so next week we should perhaps get some more clarification
or more relisting. That seems to be their thing. Now, I believe they relisted Dobbs dozen plus times before they actually took that, right?
Right.
So we don't know that it means much of anything other than that they're running out of time to take it up if they choose to do so. For this term, and it may have to be next term, which would start in October. So, the big takeaway is that they're running out of time to do this one anytime soon, and they haven't denied it. So, I mean, I don't know. It's like everything with the Supreme Court. It's a lot of tea leaf reading. Reading the entrails. Until we actually get written statements from the court or opinions from the court, So this one is like, well, I don't know. Maybe if they weren't going to take it, maybe they would just deny it, and we'd already have maybe you were listed a couple times because people want to write dissents or whatever. But also, if they were going to take it, it's a fairly straightforward. I think a lot of gun rights advocates look at this as a fairly straightforward case, basically a Heller case about common use. But, but it's also highly controversial. So I don't know. It's hard to say what this all means. I don't know if you have any guess.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It would only be a guess if I did. But to your point, multiple relists doesn't necessarily mean they're going to deny it. There are some statistics out there about how many relists and what that, typically bodes for cases. But like you said, there are those big outliers, particularly on thorny issues like the Dobbs case. And so, quite frankly, we just don't know. But of course, we will keep everyone informed. When we know more, we will make sure everyone else knows more as well. Absolutely. Oh, I wanted to mention too, by the way, I put this in the newsletter, but it's a nice thing, nice little honor for the Reload, Ad Fontes Media, which is one of these groups that rates media outlets by their lean and their factuality, and it's all if you ever use Ground News or Straight Arrow News, a lot of them will use Ad Fontes Media's rankings for how they determine what outlet is leaning what direction or whatever. I like those, and none of them are perfect, right? You can quibble with the rankings of different outlets or this or that, but I do think they're one of the most reliable ones out there that I've seen. That's okay, this is where you've got these outlets is pretty accurate to how they act. And the nice thing is that they included the Reload as one of their top media outlets, essentially one of their most reliable that they've rated, the one that they recommend people read for part of a balanced news diet is the way they describe it. They kind of use a food pyramid metaphor for it. And they have us in the fruits and vegetables, healthy news diet category. So that means that their ratings determine that we're reliable and mostly focus on factual reporting and not so much on, heavy opinion
writing. So that, and I think that's anyone who's listening to the show or listening to us talk about what we're trying to do with the Reload, that has been our goal. So I'm happy to see that group recognize that. And I will too also note, we are one of the only independent outlets in that category. This is alongside like the Associated Press, the major news outlets, Fox News's special report, CNN's website. They have a variety of different perspectives in there and audiences, but you'll notice that like ABC, CBS, Fox News, these are, the Wall Street Journal is up there, I believe, as well. The Associated Press. These are huge operations, billion-dollar companies, and the Reload is one of the few independent publication that's included in that high of a ranking. So I'm pretty proud of that, and I'm happy to see it. So just wanted to share that.
Yeah, no, it's great to get recognition, like you said, for what we try to do with the mission of the site. So
exactly,
it's cool to see.
Yeah, so I do appreciate that, and just something I wanted to pass along to folks. We are also going to have, and I think the Dispatch ranks pretty high up in their rankings as well. So one of the reasons I like them so much, and we are going to have a really quality writer from the Dispatch on the main show this week. Kevin Williamson is back, and he's going to talk to us about Trump's first week in office and also his new investigative series on the ATF. So he did like a whole series of pieces on the ATF he works as well at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. And so really thorough, good stuff. We're going to have him on. We're going to discuss all that. So make sure you tune in for that. It'll be out on Monday for most people, but of course, Reload members will get it a day early. If you want to become a Reload member, if you want to help support this tiny publication that is, duking it out with some of the biggest players in the industry as far as reliability and readability, you can head over to thereload.com and buy a membership today. It's what helps keep us going. It's been a down year. There's been a lot less interest, I think, in media and gun media in particular. So we really do rely on you guys, buying memberships to make this all possible. So we're grateful for it. We also will have a member segment this week on the podcast. So I'm excited about that. It was fun to film. That'll be on this week's show. And members will get access to it on Sunday, a day early, day before everybody else. And of course, have that opportunity to be on the show in the member segment. But speaking of the Dispatch, I'm going to have a little bit of, we got an ad swap going on with them. So I'm going to tell you about them too. This week, we're doing another ad swap with the Dispatch. We have a free 30-day trial over at the Dispatch for any Reload reader who wants to give them a try. And I think it makes a lot of sense because we tend to focus on the same things. Of course, the Dispatch has, in addition to reporting, a lot of opinion and analysis from big name folks you probably heard of, Steve Hayes, Jonah Goldberg, Olive Pundit. And there's a lot of guys over there that have been major players in the center-right conservative media space for a long time, and who I enjoy reading quite a bit. But in addition to their opinion and editorial work, they have a distinct focus on facts-first reporting, on hard news in the same way that we do here at the Reload. And I think that if you like the reporting we do, if you like our approach, you will probably enjoy the Dispatch and their approach. And they're an even bigger publication than we are, with more resources, with a wider view, of course, of politics. They go into a lot more areas than we do. And so I think they're just a really good resource, and you should check them out. Sign up for that 30-day free trial. Give it a try. Been a paying member since they were founded, and I highly recommend them. So head over to the Dispatch today to check out what they have to offer. We have a link, of course, in the description and on our website to the 30-day free trial. So give it a try. See what you like.